Raising children is difficult, and with so much information out there, it's hard to know what advice to trust. The Child Psych podcast brings you the top parenting and mental health experts in the world. This podcast is designed to encourage and educate you with the most up-to-date research and concrete strategies that foster healing and resiliency in children and teens, and tools that make parenting easier. Whether you're a professional or parent, you will walk away with answers that empower you, and you'll feel more confident knowing you are on the right path. Most importantly, we're here because we need to raise a generation of children who don't need to recover from their childhoods.
On to the Child Psych podcast. My name is Tammy, and I'm a registered child psychologist, registered play therapist, the co-founder of the Institute of Child Psychology, and I'm a mom to 3 amazing kids. Today we have with us Dr. Ellen Braaten. Welcome, Dr. Braaten, to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so just a little bit about what this podcast is going to be on, and then we'll talk about who she is, and we'll launch into a parent's question. This is all about bright kids who couldn't care less. So this is about motivation and getting our kids who kind of just want to play video games or sit in their rooms, getting them to re-engage in life. That's really what this episode is about. So we have Dr. Ellen, who is the Director of Learning and Emotional Assessment Program at Massacheusetts General Hospital, and she's an Associate Professor of Psychology at Harvard Medical School. She's widely recognized as an expert in the field of pediatric neuropsychological and psychological assessments, particularly in assessing learning disabilities and attentional disorders. And she's been the recipient of funding to conduct research on studies of children with nonverbal learning disabilities, attentional disorders, and has published numerous books and papers on that subject. She is the author of the book we're going to be talking about today, which is called Bright Kids Who Couldn't Care Less: How to Rekindle Your Child's Motivation. She also co-authored Straight Talk about psychological testing for kids. And what's our other one here? Oh, Finding the Right Mental Health Care for Your Child, which was published by the American Psychological Association. You have quite the resume.
It makes me sound very old, actually.
I just thought it made you sound very intelligent, honestly, and very accomplished.
Thank you so much. But it's surprising how, the more you work, the more time you have to do these sorts of things. So I'm very lucky.
Absolutely. Okay, so why don't I have a ton of questions, because I guess I told you before we started recording that I just finished your book yesterday, dove into it over the last week. But here is a question from one of our viewers, actually, on motivation. And I so feel this as a parent, because my kid went through this at one point. So I'm just like, oh, hang in there. It gets better. It says, I've got a super bright 12-year-old who did so well up to junior high. Now he's in the 7th grade and seems completely uninterested in school, and he's barely passing. My wife and I feel like homework is a battle almost every night, and it's eroding our relationship with him. He used to be interested in sports and playing outdoors, but now he's starting to get into gaming, and it's the only thing he's interested in. We're looking for ways to get him motivated in school and with the world offline again. So I think this will resonate with many parents. And we'll talk about your book and some of the things you attribute to motivation as we go through. But what are just a few pieces of wisdom you could give this parent who's struggling with this?
So one of the things I would say right off the bat is give this time. There is no magic bullet. And I think that is what is so frustrating for parents when they have an unmotivated child. I think if we just get them in the right sort of treatment, within 2 months, this will be solved. Motivation is a lifelong issue. And so look at this as an opportunity, because we all lose motivation at different points in our lives. And this is a big time of change for their child. Middle school is huge. So what's happened is there's been a huge change, and this child has not found his footing yet. And so it's a process now of discovering why is he unmotivated? Does he not have the skills to be motivated? Oftentimes gaming is a way of kind of like spending time when you don't know what it is you're supposed to be doing, or you can't do it. So I would really kind of think about what we're going to be talking about today, and think about it as this is something that we need to spend a lot of time thinking about. We need to spend a lot of time uncovering what is it that he doesn't care about. And that's one of the first things I would talk about is, how do you know he doesn't care? Other than the gaming, spending too much time, start to identify what those things are. start to think about whether or not your expectations are right for your child. In this case, it does sort of sound like they are. I mean, an expectation to make sure they get their homework done on time is reasonable. And then to think about what are the sorts of changes that have happened that might be undermining his motivation. So when I hear middle school, I think, do they not have the skills to be successful in middle school? And are there social issues that have gotten in the way and are causing a child to be unmotivated? So those are the first two places I would look for in a middle schooler, the first sorts of things I would think about uncovering. And then we can, I'm sure we're going to be talking about what to do in terms of looking at how then what's the next step once we sort of think about these things.
Yeah. Well, I remember going into middle school and, I was in a very small elementary school. There was basically one grade, like 20 kids in each grade, K to 6. And all of a sudden I'm in a school with 1,000 kids. And it's different. You have to go from class to class. You have 5 different teachers. There's kids, maybe you're really good at something. And now all of a sudden there's 20 other kids who are just as good at that thing. And it can really undermine your confidence. Like even going off to university, that same shift happened where you're just like, what's the point? There's just like, it's so chaotic and there's so many expectations and everything is so different that we almost sometimes can go into kind of a state of learned helplessness when we get into these chaotic environments we're not used to yet.
Completely. And that's especially true if we don't have the skills that we need to be successful. So if you're going off to college and you're feeling like, I am ready for this, I'm ready to get out of the house, have some independence, that's great. But if you get into college or middle school, it's like, I don't know how to handle all these different teachers. I went from one teacher in 5th grade to now, 6 different teachers in 6th grade. So part of it might be, giving children the scaffolding they need in order to be able to be successful. There's never just one thing too. I should say, like, it's never just, oh my goodness, it is the wrong teacher. But a lot of times there is one thing that sort of was the catalyst. So a loss of a friendship or moving from that small elementary school to a bigger school, maybe their best friend didn't move on with them. Maybe there's a teacher who sort of has it out for the child. There are lots of different things that can be sort of a catalyst in that.
Yeah. So we have to we have to uncover and kind of just be curious and, open to what possibly is in this case. Now, when I was reading through your book, and then so we'll give parents some tools here too. Like, of course, we have this beautiful acronym, so that will help guide parents. And we'll break kind of each step down, which is what I really love. In this book, there was this father who came to you and he described his son as malaise. So it's a combination of malaise and lazy. We may have to define what that means to someone who's not familiar. I had to look up that word actually. Yeah. And, you talk about, it means a lack of motivation, diminished interest in things like they used to be interested or other kids are interested in, and problems completing almost anything. Now, this could sound like anxiety and depression. Some parents immediately jump to that. Like they're like, oh my God, my kid's depressed. But based on your work, it sounds like it could be more than just that. I mean, that could be a possibility, but what are some things that could, account for the malaise kids?
So definitely, I should say that too, even in the question that you asked before, depression and anxiety should always be ruled out, always, because, having this sort of malaise, and I've had some people say, I hate that word. That's terrible. It's not my word. I should just say, definitely a father did say this, because oftentimes parents come in and say, my child just seems lazy to me. And I have yet to meet a truly lazy child. Nobody likes being lazy, actually, unless we're on a beach in the Caribbean somewhere. But most of the time we want to be productive, and kids really do want to learn. So that malaise, which is kind of like the blahs, and then lazy, which parents just think he just doesn't want to do this. Together is what, this parent sort of said. So it can be a little bit of anxiety, it can be a little bit of depression, it can be a little bit of incompetence. And that's the one thing that we often overlook in these situations. And I know I said this before, but boy, if we don't know what it is we have to do, all of us seem to have that malaisiness. So if I'm asked to do something that I cannot do, and if I'm asked to write a paper in Russian, for example, I have nowhere to start. I can't fake my way through it. And we oftentimes ask kids to do those things, especially kids with learning disabilities or who are struggling with severe depression, who are consumed with anxiety or some sort of situation that's happened that we may or may not know about, that can look like this sort of malaziness when it's really a whole different reason or whole different cause.
Okay. Yeah. And I know your book highlights, because this is one of your clinical specialties, is, kids can have a learning disability. And sometimes that doesn't get uncovered until they're expected to do some pretty high order executive kind of functioning things in junior and senior high, or even late elementary school. You also talk about like attention deficit disorder. Sometimes that we can see issues around executive functioning. Anxiety, depression. But what are some other kind of attributing, like we're talking kind of disorders, but sometimes it's not disorders at all. And we don't want to just jump the gun and be like, my kid is, needs a label, or sometimes labels can be helpful, but
it's sometimes labels can be helpful. We want to make sure if there's a label, we want to make sure we have the correct label, and that the label is only as good as the treatment that follows. So if a child has an issue, sometimes it can be slow processing speed, which is another area of my research, which looks at kids who are kind of like slower at just taking in information and then coming up with a response. So if you're always sort of a step behind your peers, you're going to eventually sort of lose motivation. You're always the last one to get done, the last one to finish. So that's one reason. Another reason is we're coming out of the pandemic. And when I started this book, I thought it was just going to be about those kids with anxiety, depression, slow processing speed, learning disabilities. And then the pandemic happened, and we are still dealing with kids who are lacking motivation. They went through a big trauma. They are negotiating social situations. Depending on their age, I see different problems for different ages of kids. And all of those problems are going to impact motivation. So in sort of the older adolescents, they did not have the same sort of social environment. So they're struggling with handling all of the different sorts of social situations that they're in that they didn't get to practice like they would have. For younger kids, they might not have gotten the right kind of education for reading, math, those sorts of things, where some kids are just more vulnerable and needed direct instruction. So they might look like they are lacking in motivation when really they're lacking in skills. So, and then the other thing is too, all of us think about the reasons why you become unmotivated at times. Oftentimes it's that we have too much to do. So there are lots of unmotivated kids who are super competent, super smart, have no kind of disorder, disability, but they're just like, I've got too much going on. I'm in all of these sports. I'm committed every minute of the day. That can be a real motivation killer. Too much stuff. When I have too much on my plate, it's not like I always charge ahead. Sometimes I'm reaching for my phone and scrolling through Instagram. It's the sort of thing with either one of those things, too much or too little, not being in our zone of pleasure too, is also important.
yeah, I think parents, and I know we talked to Kim Payne a lot about this. We're writing a book with him right now, and he talks a lot about simplifying and how we overwhelm kids with a lot of stuff. Like, because we want them to, get the best education and the best opportunities. But when they never have any downtime and they never have time to pursue the things they want to, because I think parents sometimes project like what we think kids need. Mm-hmm. And so they're in these activities they might not even like. They're doing it because that's kind of what their family does. And that's what they've been kind of told they're supposed to do. And then they are no longer in the driver's seat. They're overwhelmed. They're constantly going from, school and then soccer and then piano lessons or whatever it is, till they're finally they're just like, they're burnt out. Like they're kids and they're burning out.
Exactly. Burnout is a way of becoming unmotivated. I should say too that for a large number of kids, at least in the United States, college is the number one thing. Everybody has to go to college. Everybody has to go to a 4-year college. There's so many families that put that pressure on their kids. And some kids aren't ready to go to college at 18. They don't know what they want to study. They want to do something else. They want to do, they want to go into cosmetology or go into carpentry work or all sorts of things, coding, where you don't really need a college education. And so the pressure that parents put on their kids to be at that level where they can get into a great college can actually serve as a way of unmotivating kids. And that starts as early as middle school. You've got to have the right kind of extracurricular activities. You have to get the right kinds of grades and all of that pressure. Some kids just show that they don't want to do that by just dropping out, basically. And I don't mean literally dropping out of high school, although that can happen. I mean, like they just drop out of, doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I know for any of you who've heard me talk about my one of my kiddos, I have a 16-year-old who we know about like the different tests you can take, but she has attention deficit, slow processing speed. So her WISC scores are very low in terms of processing speed. And so in schools, because of that, school's really hard for her. Like she has a learning disability with math and reading, like this kiddo, my goodness. And we have just been very cognizant. And when I saw your model, I was like, yes, we're doing that. This is why she's hanging in there. Is we had to be like, you know what? We expect you to finish high school, but if you don't go to college, that's okay. We want you to be happy, kiddo, but that means finding your passion, finding what you're interested and using and we'll talk about aptitude is like the things you're good at, and we'll figure something out that it will fit for you. And I think when we took the pressure off her and really highlighted that to her, she was just like, then she wanted to try, because we weren't saying like, you have to do this and you have to get this job or you have to go to college. We're like, no. Like, but part of, finding happiness is finding out, what motivates you and what you have to try things in order to figure out what that is. So we'll talk about this parenting acronym you have to get kids kind of motivated to move forward in their lives in whatever capacity. And it's called, you say, the parenting app. So APP
Right.
is the acronym. So aptitude, pleasure, and practice. So let's dive into aptitude, which I love this, by the way. You wrote in your book that psychology is mostly known for answering the question, what's wrong with my child, instead of helping them determine what's right with my child. So this is where I was like, yes, it's how we frame it. It's like, what is my kiddo actually good at? Like, what is their strength? Because every child has a strength. And I don't care what disability they have a strength, they have gifts.
Absolutely. And I think we get completely far away from that when we're talking about, again, first of all, I just have to commend you on being such a wonderful parent and listening to your child. I have a child just like yours, except he's 30 and I made different choices than you did. I didn't know what I knew now. So the fact that we look at, okay, who are you and what are you good at? And everything that seems like a weakness is also a positive. So if you have a child with slow processing speed, okay, that's going to be tough for you in school. But actually in life, there are lots of places that value that slow, thoughtful kind of processing. What are those? Oftentimes people with slower processing speed are really great at forming relationships with others, because relationships are about deep connections. So thinking about what are my child's strengths. So, and sometimes parents will say, they have no strengths. Like when I have a parent in my office who has a child who's like, they just don't care about anything, I have to start with, well, let's just think about this. And we've got to think broader than just academics and intelligence. That is just a small part of life. We've got to think about what's their humanity like? What are they? Are they kind? Are they socially intelligent? Are they good at teamwork? Do they have leadership qualities? All of these things we need to sort of think about in terms of their strengths. And if you have trouble finding your child's strengths, you need to sort of think about, well, what is it? Where are they the most themselves? Like, where do they have that desire, that sense of excitement? What are the sorts of things they do without you having to remind them? And again, think broadly. Are they the sort of child that picks up the phone and calls their grandparents without being reminded? Do they play with the dog? Do they, like, all sorts of ways? There are all sorts of ways of showing your strength outside of a grade or a score on a test.
Yeah. And I think that comes down to like what we expect, who we expect our children to be and who
Yep.
they are. And that's where, you mentioned like questions we ask parents. And in your book, you say, are you expecting your child who couldn't care less to be a lot like you or your husband or your wife or your other kids? And that's not who they are. And kids, I mean, man, when we force them into what we think they should be, and we have this prescriptive checklist for them, and they can't meet that checklist because it's not who they are. There's a mismatch. Of course they shut down because we're not
Yes.
valuing them for their gifts and their strengths and their attributes. So I think it's being mindful, like you say in the book, like, you know, we've got to watch that, like what we're putting on our kids.
Yeah. And we've got to think, when and where were they happiest? That's a great place to start thinking about their strengths. If you've sort of lost that, and sometimes parents have, they have a 15-year-old who's just like, I don't care. Like, you've got to start thinking that, okay, where were you happy? And then talk to your child about this. We are so afraid to talk to our kids about, what do you think you're good at? And what are the things, which sort of moves right into pleasure too, which is, it's not, the things we're good at aren't always the things that give us pleasure. So there are kids who are very gifted in sports, for example, and their parents want them to play the sport, but it's sort of like they don't love playing the sport. So they're, great at baseball. The parents are like, this is your life. This is how you're going to get into college. But it doesn't give them pleasure. That can be also a motivating loss. So you've got to think, okay, what are your aptitudes? But then we've also then got to think about, okay, where do those aptitudes also give you pleasure? A lot of times it's the same thing, but not always.
Yeah. I think, well, I know I have a kiddo who is actually very good at sports, but she hates it. Like, we're like, this is such a missed opportunity. You're really good at this. And she's just like, she hates anything competitive. And so she really likes music and art. And we just had to like kind of grieve that a little. Like, we have this really talented kid. It doesn't matter what we put her in, she excels at it, but she hates it. And the more we push it, the more she feels inadequate, because we're saying like, you're not fitting, again, you're not hitting the checklist. And
But
her
yeah,
dad
yeah,
was big into the sports.
yeah,
So he had to
yes.
grieve that a little.
You're right, and parents do have to grieve that too. And a lot of times, your whole social life is around there. They start at age 5 doing a certain sport, and that's your whole like peer group too, not only theirs. And so it is hard to kind of let that go, especially if you've thought of your child as a star hockey player, and they want to be a poet, they want to design fashion, they want to do something that's totally different. Yeah, you've got to be able to let that go.
Yeah. What are other ways we can like figure out their aptitudes? I'm hearing like there's questions like asking, and I have, and I notice too. And what I often do with my kids is I'll make a comment when I see whether it's sharing or they're playing with the pets. Like you said, actually, my 16-year-old with slow processing speed, she's awesome with our dogs and cats and taking care of animals. And she's really good with her siblings and other people's
Yep.
children. So we started really noticing it. And we're saying your face just lights up when you do this, and you just are so helpful with them. And just saying, like, does this feel really good when you're doing these things? And then we suggested just a few things that might lend to that, like volunteering at the YMCA. She took a dog training class with our golden retriever, and then just to see, just being curious if it sparked a fire in her, and maybe it won't, but it's just being open to what might light her up. And that's our agenda.
Yeah, exactly. I think if you have a child for whom you've had an evaluation, there should be strengths in there. I think if you've lost that sort of even ability to do what you've just explained, to talk to other people, grandparents, teachers, other neighbors, even, neighbors who are always saying, oh my gosh, your son is just fabulous. He always says hello. He helps me with the groceries. That's a strength. Like, that's an important strength for life. And so to kind of capitalize on that and look at those sorts of things that are volunteer work and those sorts of things. So I think to kind of think about the things that they don't have to be asked to do. So it's the sort of things that, they're always like fiddling on the piano or something like that, or always with a book. Like, there are some kids who just love to read to the exclusion of everything else. So there are ways to just sort of say or look and just be, have that inner voice of, where is my child spending his time when he seems happy? And I have to say, most kids do not seem that happy when they're playing video games. So it's not just where are they spending their time, but where do they seem to light up?
Yeah. I think too, with video games, I've talked to a lot of teenagers, and I think a big part of it is it's one of the places they have control. They can be creative. They can, when they don't feel socially accepted in person, maybe they lack social skills, that they get a sense of belonging because they're gaming with other kids. So sometimes, if I have, I know, I kind of know that that's what it can be for them. So the question is how, where are they lacking control in their lives? Where are they, is there a way I can connect them in person to other kids, if that's what it is? They probably need more play. They've had too much structure in some places. So again, it's like, well, why do they seek that out? And those seem to be a lot of the reasons, and they're addictive. That's a whole nother podcast.
They are addictive. Exactly. They are addictive. They are, I mean, all of those things are true, but oftentimes we kind of revert to those sorts of, to social media, those sorts of things, just because there's not, we're not, we're overwhelmed sometimes, and we don't always know what to do with ourselves.
Okay. So aptitude is finding your kid's strengths. Now, the second piece of the acronym is pleasure, and that can come from things that we have aptitude in. But what other things do we need to consider? Because I know you might have a parent who says, my kid is so apathetic. Like they're not interested. It's almost like they don't gain pleasure from anything. Like it doesn't matter what we do. It's just like flat. We would say they have, a psychologist, they have flat affect. But what would you, where do we need to kind of do some work here with the pleasure part of this acronym?
So first of all, we need to be more in touch with pleasure in our own lives. We do not have enough pleasure happening in our own lives. Parents are traveling one place to the other in the car all the time. So first of all, think about yourself. Where am I happiest, and what kind of model am I presenting to my child about pleasure? So the other things you want to do is, first of all, if it's chronic apathy, you want to get that checked out. You want to make sure that there aren't any symptoms of depression or even anxiety. Sometimes anxiety can be debilitating and we can sort of freeze. But sometimes kids get stuck in the apathy zone because they never have a chance to sort of do something that they're competent in. That's why that aptitude is important, but that also they enjoy doing. And so being in touch with, first of all, thinking about what do you like doing? And I've had parents say to me, I don't want to ask my child that question because I'm afraid of what he'll say. That's how afraid we are of pleasure in our world. But I think if you're not really sure, and it's really tough for you to find that apathetic child, start with talking about gratitude. What are the sorts of things that you're grateful for? Incorporate gratitude into your family's life, talking about what are we most thankful for today. Spend time with your child doing pleasurable activities. So if they really love music and they want you to listen to the song that they're really into, start there. And we oftentimes are in such a hurry when our child says, oh my gosh, mom, you have to listen to this song. We're like, you need to get your homework done. They do need to get their homework done, but they're telling you what gives them pleasure, and you need to listen to those sorts of things. And make sure you don't have a house, let me see how to say this better. Make sure your house doesn't just value self-sacrifice, performance at all costs. That is a pleasure killer. So when we are overdoing it, it takes the pleasure out of things. And the one other way to be more cognizant of pleasure is to slow everything down. So when we're too busy, we don't stop and smell the roses. And I think that that's one other way of kind of figuring this out. What gives you pleasure, and talking to your kids about what gives them pleasure.
Yeah, we talk to our kids, my husband and I, a lot about we try to model it. And we're like, what do your dad and I do that lights us up? We always talk about what lights you up. And for me, it's horses. Like I have 9 of them at home, and I do training and lessons. And so they know, if I'm not in the house, I'm probably out in the barn, or I'm not doing something with the kids. And my husband, he fixes old snowmobiles and he raises chickens. Like he's an engineer, but this is something he just does that lights him up. He loves to fix things. He loves to create things. And so we told them, it doesn't have to be what we're interested in, but what lights you up, guys? That's what we want you to find. And that's what I think we're talking about when we're saying pleasure, what brings joy to them. Doesn't feel like work, it's play. And I think what we're talking about is what feels playful to them, where they lose track of time and they don't do it because it's a goal. They're not trying to reach a goal. They do it just because they love doing it. They lose themselves in it.
Absolutely true. It's the sort of things. What are the sorts of things you would do, even if nobody paid you to do it? Even if you given unlimited time, what are the sorts of things you look forward to? What makes you feel excited? What are the sorts of things you have to stop them from doing in order to move on to something else? And not in that way of like they're addicted to something and you can't get, but really, what are the sorts of things that, and then talking to them, why did you like this? Did you find it challenging? Is challenging good for you? For some kids, they love a challenge. Others, they really, what gives them pleasure are things that are really simple for them to do and automatic. So it's not the same for everybody.
Okay. Now, this is like actually a question that I have just because of my kind of value set and some of the research I've done on this. So I'm curious what you think about it. So with kiddos who have, for instance, ADHD, we know with a legitimate diagnosis, not, I think it's diagnosed at 11% and it's actually should be 2.5%. So we know there's kids who are diagnosed who shouldn't be.
Yeah.
But that being said, we know kids with ADHD have dopamine dysfunction, legitimate ADHD. So what we often see is they lack motivation because they lack a neurotransmitter, like enough dopamine, which is all about motivation.
Mm-hmm.
So we know that rewards, tangible rewards can, when there's a goal and I get something at the end of it, can increase dopamine. But I always tell parents that can undermine it's external motivation and it can undermine internal motivation. What is your theory on rewards in kids and motivation? I'm just, because this is a specialty of yours. I am not a sticker chart parent. I never did any of that.
They don't really work all that well. So here's the thing. What we really want to mostly do in life is, especially when we're talking about motivation, is to have things in our lives that are intrinsically motivating, meaning that we do it because we just love to do it. We want to get up. We want to just, whatever it is, reach for the book and read for pleasure or exercise because we get something from that. So in kids with ADHD, the things that I really do always think about, are they getting enough exercise and are they getting enough sleep? Because all of that is important for that brain functioning that we're talking about. That can get in the way too. And we often miss that as terms of motivation. But I think there are different things that we need to have external motivators for. And there are just a few areas when I'm thinking about a child with ADHD. One is they've waited too long. It has to be done. Everyone is very clear about this. Okay, you've got to get this done. If you get this done, I'm going to give you X, Y, or Z as a reward. I don't like doing it. Like, it's okay to say as a parent, I don't like doing this, but we are in a bind here. And this is, we're going to, next time we're going to do this differently. So if it's something that really needs to be done quickly, if it's something that's really not that fun to do, it's okay to get an external reward for that. So it's, it's the sort of thing where you have to clean your room or, people clean out the garage and they go out for ice cream or something like that, those sorts of things. So if it's something that really is not intrinsically motivating in general, it's never intrinsically motivating to clean your closet until you get that feeling of like, whoa, everything's in its place. I love this. So those are the areas that I would focus on. I think we do rely too much on extrinsic motivations, especially for kids with ADHD, because we're frustrated as parents. So we're like, you got to get this done. So kind of thinking about this and talking to your child about why they are doing this assignment, why this is important, and also saying, okay, you've got to get this done. I know you don't love math or whatever it is, but math is important. Here's why it's important. You won't always need this. And so let's figure out a way to make this fun for you.
Yeah, I had this experience recently, actually just this summer. It was the most frustrating summer I've ever had with my daughter. She was trying to get her learner's permit for driving, and she waited a really long time to do the test. And she has a learning disability, so this test is horrible for her. It is horrible. She's really struggles with reading and multiple choice. So, and she probably mortified that I said this, but she had failed the test multiple times. And so finally we cut back on her phone use and said, it's 1 hour a day until you pass the exam. We'll help you study. We got cue cards. We got an app for her. Like, we did everything. We studied with her. And then it just so happened that her phone died because it was a really old phone. And then we finally said, okay, kiddo, you got to pass the exam before you get a new phone. So you're basically, poop out of luck until you pass the exam. And it was brutal. It was brutal, but it was honestly, the only thing that motivated her to study for this damn thing. And I normally don't like doing that because it's not like, I didn't want it to be punitive, but it worked. And it was so hard and deflating every time she didn't pass this exam. She'd always miss it by 1 or 2 questions, but she passed after 11 attempts and she finally did. And then it was like this huge thing, but we also highlighted, like, for her to get a job, she needs a car. We live in the country.
Yeah.
Like this is a life skill. This isn't, it's a non-negotiable. You can't take a bus when we live out here. You
Yeah.
need to be able to drive.
And the thing to remember too, as parents, is that you are building resiliency. Like this is not, to us, it feels like traumatic to see our child without their phone. But you know what? She's going to remember that in a positive way. She is definitely not going to say, my parents did that. They're going to be like, like someday they will use this for their own children or their own relationships or whatever. This is not a bad thing. It feels bad and punitive as a parent, but I think that it's clear. And the other thing too, I think it's hard with ADHD, especially is because clear limits work really well. You do this, you get that, but maybe don't always have that reward as being, just back to your question, not to the example you gave, but don't always have the award be something that's like so great that it makes what we ask them to do, like make them think like, well, nobody want to do this. And that's, a lot of the research on reading, for example, if we reward kids too much for reading, they start to think like, I only read when somebody gives me a reward.
Yeah, I know there's all those really old studies from the 60s about like kindergarten children who are given a reward for using this like felts or something or crayons, and the kids would engage in, there's one with puzzles too with university students. So there's classic studies on motivation that when we provide a reward for doing something kids naturally want to do,
Yeah.
it actually undermines them entirely. They quit doing it.
Exactly. And the example that you gave with your daughter is not one of those things. Like taking the driver's test is not something that's intrinsically motivating. It's like scary and anxiety provoking. It's sort of like, okay, you've got to do this. It's something that's got to be done. Let's find the right kind of reward so you get on the other side of this.
And to be fair, we chalked it up to like many discussions on her grit and resilience and her ability to like put her nose in that book for weeks, especially towards the end. Like she was studying 3-4 hours on her own without being prompted. And we just said, like, you can do hard things, kiddo. You have a learning disability. Of course, this was hard, but we're so proud of her. She was so proud. Like, it was amazing. But dang it, we had to take the phone away. Like, we were just like, we didn't want to, but we did, and it worked.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. In those cases, it does work. It's the hardest thing to do, the hardest.
Yeah. Okay, so the last part of your acronym, because we're running out of time, is practice. So like, okay, so you've got like these kiddos who figured out the aptitude, maybe pleasure. Talk about my daughter and her practice.
Yes.
Expand more on this idea of practice, like
So
how we get them there, and yeah.
So practice is, what are the sorts of things that they do when given unlimited time? What would they do? How would they spend their time? And of course, all of these things sort of seem like they're one and the same, but they're not. So aptitude, what are we naturally good at? Pleasure, what do we love doing? Practice, given unlimited time, how would I spin my wheels? And so where we want to be in terms of helping a child be motivated is at the intersection of those three things. So practice is, what do we persist at doing? So it's, sort of the thing like we might not be great at tennis, but a child might just practice, throwing the tennis ball at the garage over and over again. So they may be very persistent at that. So it's the sort of things that we don't need to be externally motivated to do. And that's probably the easiest way for me to kind of describe that. So, what are the sorts of things that, and homework, for example, is usually not intrinsically motivating. And when it is, pay attention to that, because that is probably an area of your child's strength. So if they love like doing the creative writing assignment, but they hate the rest of the homework, pay attention to that. That's something that's probably an area where they would practice if they had more time. So the important thing about practicing, though, is that a lot of kids don't have time to demonstrate that. So they don't their schedules are so they're so overscheduled, they don't have time to even figure out what would they be practicing if they had more time. So make sure you've got a schedule that gives them time to sort of be bored, to kind of figure out like, all right, you've got all day to do something, or all summer, figure out what you want to do. And that's you want to make sure, again, that motivating things are things that they would naturally find themselves in the middle of those three things.
Beautiful. Yeah, I think what's important here, I think parents, and as a parent who has a kiddo who has been stuck here in the past, she is now motivated, but like it took years because of her learning disability, ADHD, processing speed issues to really figure out and just unearth where her strengths were. She now is motivated. She walks the dogs and she helps with her siblings and she helps her dad outside with building things because she's got great work ethic if she enjoys what she's doing. And we just had to grieve that she was never going to be a strong student. But then the expectation was being like, kiddo, you just need to like graduate high school. Like we don't,
Yeah.
that's it. Like, and eventually you're going to get a job. But we have to let go sometimes of how we thought our kids were going to be or who we thought they would be, or they're not like our other kids. And that's often why parents are blinded to see their kids' strengths, because they just want them to fit into this box of what we thought success would be or how to get a good job or whatever that is.
Exactly. And the way they'll show you that they want you to listen is by becoming more and more unmotivated. So they will be like, nobody's paying attention. I'm just going to say, forget it. And so they'll stop doing those things. They'll stop kind of practicing the things that they used to love doing, drawing, like just kicking around the soccer ball, whatever it is. They'll stop doing that because it's sort of like no one is helping me figure this out. So what you did is just so important. And the first thing is really figuring out who is my child and really listening.
Yeah. And for any parents, because I'm talking about a child I have who has several codes, like she has what's called an IPP. So, we had her tested at school when she was in elementary, and I know you have some resources I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast. If parents aren't sure, where to get these sorts of tests, psychologists can do them. The schools often have funding to get them done. Just sometimes parents do have to push for that. Yeah. So that's, if you're one of those parents like me, yeah, we had to go down the route and push to get a psychologist to assess her through the school. The school paid for it, which was wonderful. I realize that's not always an option. Sometimes parents do have to seek that out, but you do have a guide for parents on that, I believe. You wrote, with the American Psychological Association.
Yes, exactly.
And then the treatments that are appropriate, right?
Exactly.
Okay, beautiful. Because I know we've had to do the tutoring option just to get her through math. Like there's no other way to do it. Like she can't get through math without tutoring. There's not, and we're not teachers anymore. Yeah. And I never taught junior high and high school, so I'm useless when it comes to that.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your time today. This was illuminating. And again, everyone, the book we were talking about today was Bright Kids Who Couldn't Care Less. And what I really love about this book is there's so many case studies of talking about kids who have really struggled and like seeing it through to the end. Like what are some interventions and what are some considerations these parents need to make? And what are maybe some of the blind spots for parents? And lots of like tools for parents, like questions and like, what can I do? And how do I need to rethink this? And what's the next steps? So it's really tangible. I thought it's like almost like a workbook for parents of being like trying to work through this one step at a time, how to get kids to where we need them to be. It's just not always going to look the way we thought it would.
Exactly. And I think we actually have a workbook coming out sometime next year that really kind of operationalizes a lot of this, but it definitely is the sort of thing that it's really a lot about asking questions and figuring this out and putting words to what's happening for your child that they don't have.
Beautiful. So everyone, that's Bright Kids Who Couldn't Care Less, How to Rekindle Your Child's Motivation. And there's a link to her book in the notes of this podcast. If you just look down below the episode, the description, just scroll down. And I've also included a link to Dr. Ellen's website as well, where you can learn more about her books and articles, research, all of that stuff. So thank you so much for today. It was just a lovely conversation.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
Okay. Thank you. Have a great day.
We would love to continue to walk with you on your parenting and professional journey. Whether you're looking to enroll in a single course, join our free summit, or sign up for either our professional or parenting membership, we have something for everyone. And if you haven't joined us yet, our Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and weekly newsletters are full of free resources and quick tips. Links can be found in the show notes. Together, let's raise a generation of children who don't need to recover from their childhood.